man makes of occasion. Is it not fantastic to step out? Wonderful, yeah. On 16th of July 2009, he was inducted into the ICC Cricket Hall of Fame. He was appointed OPE in 1992. And Gower is nicknamed Lord Gower by his Sky Sports colleagues, an allusion to his aristocratic ancestry and public school education. He's come all the way from down south. I give you Mr. David Gower!
Willie, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I wanted to start with 3 apologies, but after Willie I had to make it 4. You are the first apology, but hugely entertaining, so thank you for the build-up. The other apology, the next apology is as alluded to earlier by the great man himself. The dress, I'm just parading the stage so you get a proper look at it. The dress code, I apologise for. I did understand it. I did my absolute best to leave home. Yes, thank you, to take a photograph of you. You've got the fucking full length. I did my best this morning to pack the entire kit, including my favourite silver studs, the perfect bow tie that I can clip on, can't tie, all that sort of shit. And unfortunately, I had one of those days. Got on the flight to Heathrow, no problem. Everybody very friendly there, sat there quietly, read my book, no problem. We arrived in 70-mile-an-hour winds, landed, no problem. Thank you, British Airways, for that. It was the smoothest landing I've had for quite some years. We walked smoothly through to baggage reclaim, where events said, I'm very sorry, there is no baggage. And apparently, health and safety says, you cannot offload the bags in Edinburgh when it's too windy. And my only suggestion is that I really think they should ditch the kilts-only rule for baggage handlers in Next apology is the speech will be about cricket. And the final apology is that most of it will be in English. Anyway, the very full introduction, thank you for that, was taking most of my speech, to be honest. Because I was indeed, during that thing we call a career, loosely, I was indeed England's captain. And of course that includes Scotland as well, and Wales, and bits of Ireland, and basically most of South Africa, and various other countries as well. But I was indeed England's captain. 32 times in all in the proper stuff we call test matches, 10 of which, as was referred to, were against the West Indies, against whom I had what is unfortunately known as a 100% record. 3 of you realise we didn't win many of those. Now I want to talk you through it. It's unfortunate, it is unfortunate. When the first 5-0 happens to you, you think it's a bit unlucky. The second 5-0, it's a bit Oscar Wildish. I want to talk you through the one good day we had, 1986, Tour of the Caribbean, where I proudly led England into battle for 3 months. Now I understand fully, of course, most West Indies tours in those days were January to April. It's a lovely time of year to go to the Caribbean. I see from some of the colours around you, most of you been already. Most of you understand exactly what we're talking about. We thought it was a great idea. 3 months in the Caribbean, we knew we'd have a few days off, and in fact I was right, because we reverted to the old system of 3-day test matches. Albeit inadvertently. And the one good day we had a one-day international playing Port of Spain in Trinidad. Now Trinidad has its attributes. Most of us, most of you will know about Barbados, Antigua, the lovelier islands, the beaches, all that sort of stuff. Trinidad, it's full of oil and all the rest of it. It's not quite so scenic necessarily, but it does have a beautiful cricket ground because there's a hill behind it. And we were playing a one-day international there in 1986, where it was actually quite straightforward, because things like, for instance, let me talk about team selection. People assume that team selection is an earnest occupation, where the captain, the vice-captain, the tour manager, maybe an assistant, a couple of other senior players, get around a table and discuss who the best 11 are to play for England that following day, wherever you are. Almost true. In Trinidad, especially at the time of carnival, it's very easy to lose players. And I mean overnight. It's a very easy town just to lose 4 or 5 in just like that. So actually, team selection was the following morning of the game, and the first 11 there would get a game. The day I had to say it started badly already because the weather was fine, which meant we had to play. So the 11 got down there, and they have that, as you'll understand, those that understand the game will realise that there is the formality. It is called the toss. It's a technical term, but it involves the captain of one side meeting the captain of the other side, out in the middle, half an hour before play is due to start. And I'll paint the scene for you. My opposite number there was Viv Richards. Now Viv walked out, I mean, I did my best to be fair, well, I mean, obviously I'll let you down tonight, but I did my best to be dressed as for the part of England captain. Clean white blazer, maybe a cap optional. But I was looking the part of an England or even an international cricket captain. Viv arrives out there with a pair of dirty maroon tracksuit bottoms, a dirty grey t-shirt and a beanie hat. As if he owned the place, which he actually did. I'll give you another clue. Viv is now Servive, and I'm not. That tells you where the series went that year. Basically, coin goes up, comes down, he wins the toss, and West Indies elect to bat first. Probably, I think, to try and make the game last a bit longer. Now, I'll tell you through this. Okay, this is where a bit of mathematics starts. Now, West Indies batting first. You've got some of the greats of all time, the great bowling attacks, you've got the great batsmen of that era, which has been the leading one, and they've got Greenwich and Haynes opening the batting, 2 of the world's finest ever batsmen in that role. After 20 overs of this 50 over per side game, West Indies are 180 for 1. It's worth a giggle. I'm going to tell you something. I was fucking delighted because this was the best start we'd had all tour. And as you know, some of you will know, with a one-day game like that, you need at least 5 bowlers to take part at some stage, probably more. And I'm going to tell you something else. Fast bowlers, I'm sure there must be one in here somewhere, fast bowlers who are not normally PhD candidates. There was laughter, yeah, okay. Not normally, in fact, I'm going to be confident, never PhD candidates. Suddenly discovered, in the heat of the Caribbean, on this field in Trinidad, in Port of Spain, Trinidad, discovered new interests, in particular, horticulture. I'll explain. While trying not to catch my eye, they would be looking at the 5 or 6 different types of grass on this field at the Queen's Park Oval, Port of Spain. There's the couch grass, the thick couch grass that lives on the outside of the field, comes up nice and fast in the hot, humid conditions of the Caribbean. There's the ryegrass and bent fescue and stuff which they put in the middle on the pitch, which holds the pitch together and stops it disintegrating. And there is also, actually a bonus for deep square leg, is what they call the Ian Botham Memorial Patch, which is where someone in the crowd has thrown a nice lighted, sort of blue smoky piece of grass in from their own enjoyment, and if you're in that particular area deep square leg at the time, life is actually rather relaxed. But all these people are trying to avoid my eyes. I'm looking for people desperate to bowl at some stage during these 50 overs. Anyway, we get to the end of 50 overs, West Indies 320. Rules of the game, 321 to win. Right, we need someone to bat. 10th return, that means walking out at the start of the innings. We had a fellow called Graham Gooch, who was a very, I have to say, great friend once. But a very, very fine player of the fastest bowling in the world, which is what we now had to face and had been facing for the last couple of months. And we sort of kind of looked around the dressing room for volunteers, and if anyone happened to catch my eye, he got the job. And it didn't really matter who went out with Graham Gooch. So 40 minutes later, we are out there watching these two go out, and they pass, actually on the edge of the outfield, they pass a fellow, one of the West Indies great bowlers of all time, Malcolm Marshall, from Barbados, played for Hampshire for 20 years as well. Lovely, lovely man, but mighty dangerous with a cricket ball in his hand. I'll point out now, in the record books then and now, they have little things called initials that go by people to give you a clue as to what they did. Malcolm Marshall was always put down as RF, which stands for right arm fast. In my diaries at the time, he went down as RFF, which is still pretty fucking rapid, I tell you that. Anyway, Graham goes past Malcolm, who's 5 yards in from the edge of the field. Has another 70 yards to go to his end of the field, his end of the pitch, looks behind him as he sort of takes stock of what's going on out there, looks behind him where basically the rest of the West Indies team is now lurking. Looks in front of him, there's Malcolm Marshall 70 yards away in the distance, there's his opposite number, the batsman at the other end, and an umpire. That is the scene. Malcolm Marshall comes in and races in at about 20 miles an hour himself and lets the first ball go at about 85 miles an hour, which is what we call in the trade a gentle loosener. The ball pitches, zips past the outside edge of Graham's bat and the outside edge of Graham himself, no mean feat, and thuds into the gloves a fellow called Geoffrey Dujon, the West Indies wicketkeeper, who's 30 yards behind Graham over there somewhere. And as Dujon tended to do at the start of every innings, he took the ball, felt the pain, went, Jesus fucking Christ, he went sort of Irish West Indian thing. And he passed the ball to first slip, to second slip, to third slip, to fourth slip, to fifth slip, to first gully, second gully, third gully, and cover. Basically getting virtually all the West Indies team involved, apart from Longleg over there, who's just getting loose to bowl the second over the game if he's needed. Cover, Gus Logie has a huge straight long throw to get it back to Malcolm Marshall, and the process is repeated. And as we develop this opening over of our reply, still chasing 321, this pattern emerges. Ball delivered, ball thuds into gloves, ball gets back to bowler, bowler comes in again, delivers again, ball thuds into gloves, and so on. Round about the fifth ball of this opening over, we are still none for none, chasing 321. The good news is we have wickets in hand. And Malcolm Marshall delivers this at 90-something miles an hour. And this time, when the ball is thudding into the gloves of Geoffrey Dujon behind the stumps, Malcolm Marshall is following through. This is a technical term. In certain countries, yes indeed, in certain countries, in particular India, this can mean something entirely different. On this particular occasion, it means that Malcolm Marshall, 5'10", Barbados, Hampshire and West Indies, skids to a halt about 1.5 feet in front of Graham Gooch in a cloud of dust and grass clippings. Skids to a halt, and they're now eyeball to eyeball, and the ball is thrown directly back to Malcolm, who says to Graham Gooch, "You see this here, man? It red, it rolled, and made a leather, now you try and hit it." To be fair, this is the sort of thing that this actually explains the game to non-believers. This explains the game of cricket in a nutshell. It is unusual, to say the least, that such words are uttered in the midst of an international game between two experienced players. And Graham now has several minutes to think about this as Malcolm walks back to the end of his run-up, which is now 3 steps up into the pavilion at the men's end of the Queen's Park Oval in Port of Spain, Trinidad. And as he accelerates down the steps and onto the field yet again, Graham Gooch is thinking of what to do next. This time, the ball is delivered at 95 miles an hour. It is quick, it is rapid, it is short, and Graham Gooch hits it cleanly for the first time, makes contact, and he hits it on top of what they call the carried beer stand at deep mid-wicket. This goes for 6. It carries clean over the boundary, on top of the stand, bounces once into the car park, bounces once again into a passing truck, and heads off down towards the harbour. And Malcolm Marshall follows through yet again. And this time he skids to a halt 1 foot in front of Graham Gooch, and another cloud of dust and grass clippings. And this time it's Graham's turn to speak for the first time, in those forceful Essex tones of his, those slightly knock-knees of his. He looks Malcolm Marshall in the eye and says, "Right then," he says, "you know what it looks like, you go and fetch it." Truth of the day, in the heat of the Caribbean that day, that was the only game we won all tour pretty much. We won by a couple of wickets. Graham Gooch got 100, I got a very good 13 at a crucial moment, I suspect. And I think the BBC, of course, had it reported we lost it. To be serious about that era of cricket in the 80s, though, the West Indies were the strongest side in the world, possibly ever. If you think about the names involved, I mentioned Viv Richards. There were people like Desmond Haynes, Gordon Greenwich, ahead of him in the order. Larry Gomes, Richardson, Dujon, the bowling attack of Michael Holding, Andy Roberts, Joel Garner, Malcolm Marshall, Colin Croft, and those are the first 5, any 4 of which were players. There was another 5 or so who could have been in that side, who just could not get into the side. It was an awesome time to be playing, and not a great time, to be honest, to be a batsman at the other end. And I take my hat off to all of those guys, people like Alan Lamb in my side, people like Alan Gower for Australia who got runs against them on a regular basis. There is a word that is used constantly when you have that sort of level of pace bowling against you. It is intimidation, which is, in a nutshell, it's the art of persuading someone with a bat and gloves in his hand and nowadays a helmet on his head to retreat. And the threat is simply 5.5 ounces of leather, twine, red leather, cork, all the rest of it that makes a cricket ball, which at 90 miles an hour can do a lot of serious damage, to be honest. There are people like Phil Tufnell who've never known this because they're normally about 5 yards away at square leg, avoiding any sense of intimidation whatsoever. And that is in fact the entire idea of being intimidated, to get you out of the way so that the game can move on more quickly. There's another slant to intimidation. I mentioned a man there called Gower, also from Barbados, who played at Somerset alongside with Richards and Ian Botham. And in the glory days, in the mid-80s, again, of Somerset cricket alongside the glory days of West Indies cricket, there were trophies galore, especially the one-day trophies at Taunton, which were filling the cabinet. NatWest, Benson Hedges, you name them, they were there. And it was Botham, Richards and Garner who did most of the damage. And at the end of one of those long summers, great summer of Somerset, he was in one of those many bars in Taunton, clutching a pint of rum and something, looking down from a great height, he was 6'8", looking down from a great height on all and sundry, when eventually one of Somerset's prettier, younger supporters plucked up the courage to go and congratulate the great man. She walked up, and she looked up into those big, soulful red eyes and said, "Joel, may I call you Joel?" She said, yeah, man, no problem, look down here, no problem. She said, "Joel, something I've been meaning to ask you." She said, "Let's just ask away, ask me anything you want to ask." She said, "Joel, thanks again for a great summer." She said, "Look, there's someone to know, which is this. You are, I think, according to record, 6'8". And he looked and said, "Yeah, Lily, 6'8" in the stocking feet." She said, "Not worry about stockings, but," she said, "Joel, very hard for us. Are you," she says, "are you built in proportion?" And Joel looked down kind of said, "If I were built in proportion, I'd be 9 foot 8. And if that doesn't constitute intimidation, I have no idea what does. And the fascinating thing, well, the great thing about being involved in my sport over those years, best part of 20 years or so overall as a professional player, 15 years or so as an international player, is that I genuinely enjoyed, obviously the cricket was quite fun, and winning is even more fun, and the whole thing of being a professional sportsman is an awesome privilege. It's something which, to get to that level, to be basically paid for doing what you used to quite enjoy, until it gets a bit serious, the whole thing is a great experience. What I also loved was the travel. I found that cricket takes us to some extraordinary places, the third world, like Australia. I speak of Australia in a moment much more fondly. But Australia, New Zealand, South Africa now, the West Indies was great fun in those days. Asia I find fascinating, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, fascinating places to be. On a serious note, I took a team down there to India in 1984-5, and it was a tour where, going back to selection, we had the selection meeting knowing that, for instance, the great Ian Botham, my great friend and colleague now of 40 years, Ian was unavailable. I think he was in pantomime in Bournemouth or something like that. Where his performance in the Bournemouth Echo was described as wooden. There were people, Mr. Graham Gooch, for instance, who we mentioned just now, was in the middle of a couple of years ban as a result of the rebel tours of South Africa. A couple of very important players who could have been there under other circumstances were not. Selection was an interesting one. We, at this time, ahead of a tour, we tend to meet in a nice country house hotel, maybe, something like that. So chairman, selectors, captain, vice captain again, all that sort of thing. And you discuss the 16 players you need to play under certain conditions. India at this time, you need a mixture of good batsmen who can play spin bowling, good spinners, decent pacemen. You need the whole balance. And in those days, we had to pick a side which needed to play the same squad would play test matches, ODIs, and a whole host of local matches as well. And we hadn't got, I say, the great all-rounder. We hadn't got one of our finest opening batsmen. We took a fellow called Graham Fowler from Lancashire to open batting. He did remarkably well, did brilliantly down there. And instead of him both, we came up with, at the end of this meeting, about the 8th bottle of claret, some lovely beef and all the rest of it. We were still short of an all-rounder. And I suggested the name of my great friend, Christopher Cowdrey, son of Lord Cowdrey, a mate I've known since I was 18, and who was having a particularly good season for Kent as an all-rounder. So I said, how about Chris? And everyone else was so knackered, tired, drunk, whatever it might have been. They agreed straight away. So I rang him up 10 minutes after, and he said, Chris, I've got news for you. You're coming to India, you are on the tour. And he said, well, how's that then? I said, well, if you can't pick your mates, who can you pick? 2 days before the tour goes, he rings me up. And he says, I've got a problem. I said, what? He said, I've been training. I said, who told you to do that? Definitely hasn't come from me. And he'd been out training. And he's been out, in fact, one of the oldest players on the tour, which is quite a good idea. You get trained a lot slower that way. And he pulled a muscle at the back of the leg. He pulled a hamstring. And he sort of rings me out and says, look, I didn't know who to speak to. I didn't want to speak to the general selectors because that would be embarrassing. I just thought, well, you're my mate, you're the captain, I'll tell you. He said, I won't go to bowl for about 3 or 4 weeks. I said, brilliant. Absolutely perfect. So we got him on the flights, did all that, and we got on with the tour. Now, this was a tour, this is a very serious part of it. This was a tour where we arrived in Delhi, October-ish, November-ish, 1984. The night we arrived, about 3 o'clock in the morning, we go to bed quickly. 6 o'clock that very same morning, India's Prime Minister at the time, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, was shot dead by one of her own bodyguards. And we got the news, we have a press conference scheduled for that morning, which is normally going to be along the lines of, we're delighted to be here, a 4-month tour, hard work, looking forward to the challenges, India, great side, we know what we're going to do, we really hope we can do well, looking forward to it. The first thing we had to say was, or I had to say as captain, was we'd like to commiserate with the entire Indian nation for the loss of your Prime Minister. It's fascinating because our journalists knew the story, the Indian journalists had no idea there was some kind of a news blackout, if I can use that expression. And they went white, if I can use that expression. And this is still meant to be a serious topic. So we then had 2 weeks of national mourning in India where we could do absolutely nothing. Then we went to the High Commission, ate their pies, drank their gin, did fielding practice on their lawn, went to Colombo for 2 weeks, or most parties 2 weeks, to play some games, came back into India and restarted the tour with about 10 days, 2 weeks to go until the first test match. We then get to Mumbai, Bombay as it was then probably, and we settle into that famous Taj Hotel, which is brilliant. And we had one of those things that they call official functions. We had what's known as official function with the Deputy High Commissioner in Bombay, a fellow called Percy Norris, and his family at their residence. And it is glorious. So many of these things can be deadly, can be dull, can be just a ritual. We went to this place, we were so entertained, no one wanted to leave. And the following morning, everyone's getting up groggily at the hotel, and we get a phone call. And Percy Norris, our own Deputy High Commissioner, has been shot dead in traffic lights by terrorists, to this day unknown. And we now have what is known as a genuine, this is not in the Test match captain's manual, to be honest. We now have a situation where 16 England players are in a hotel in Bombay, British Airways have closed down, or British businesses have closed down for a couple of days. We're told to sit tight. And the players, some of them are worried, they want to go home, they think they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have meetings about this, we try and persuade them to, obviously it's going to be okay, and eventually we get the all clear from the High Commission that this is indeed a random incident and that the test match will go ahead and the tour will go ahead. And I went round the whole hotel, well, at least the rooms with our players in. I've seen some of the others before, to be honest. And we spread the word. We said, look, we're going to go down to the ground. The test match is on, the tour is on. We're going down to the ground for practice. And Graham Fowler, that cheeky chappie from Lancashire, who did so on the tour, said, practice? What sort of practice? Target practice. Under circumstances like this, the humour never goes amiss. And we get to the morning of the game. And we're now a little bit more relaxed. There's still a tension around the game, which you always have anyway at the start of an international game and a test match. But there is tension because of the situation. And we've got a bus waiting outside the Taj Hotel, and we have most of the players sitting on this bus ready to go to play in this first test match. And there's one man One of the star picks, as far as I was concerned, was a fellow called Phil Edmonds, Philippe Henri Edmonds. Slow left-arm spinner, Middlesex, Cambridge University, and loved an argument. And he's standing in the lobby saying, I'm not getting on the bus. I am not getting on that bus. He looked at me and said, Dave, that bus is a target. Everyone knows the route from the Tash Hotel to the Wankity Stadium. Honestly, it is called the Wankity Stadium. It's true. No, it's true. He says, and it took 15 years, he said, I'm not getting on that bus, it is a target, everyone knows we're going from here, I'm not getting on that bus. We talked him round, and eventually he agreed. He said, I will get on that bus only on one condition, that I can sit on the inside of Mike Gatton. Anyway, in short, we got through that tour well. We got through intact. We were glad to hear. We won the series there. We had some great performances from great players, and it was a memorable time. But I want to talk briefly about Australia as well. There is something in this game of cricket. We all know that the Ashes are special. The Ashes between England and Australia, well over 100 years of history now. And when I first played in an Ashes series against, admittedly, a sort of kind of Australian second 11, it was still the Ashes. It was still people like Rodney Hogg, who could bowl as quickly as virtually anyone, including almost Jeff Thompson. When we played the next series, it was against two Chappells, against Rod Marsh, against Dennis Lillee, against Jeff Thompson, against Rodney Hogg, against some of the great Australian names of all time. There is an absolute history about Ashes cricket which you can never deny. To be part of that is something very, very special. But I was, despite all that, I was doing something a few years ago, a couple of years ago now, for one of the more recent Ashes series here in this part of the world, I say this part of the world, in the UK. And you've got to be very careful. It's a very, very delicate situation, as we know. But ahead of a home Ashes series, if I can put it that way, I'm in London doing a day, talking to all sorts of people from all sorts of publications, Financial Times, Radio Times, Reader's Digest, this, that, and the other. And this very sweet girl from the Radio Times asked me the key question about the Ashes. She says, is the Ashes about a clash of culture? And we were halfway through a long day, and some mischievous side crept in again. I said to her, I'm not sure you can have a clash of cultures when one country doesn't have a culture. Look, okay, fine, I take the point, and you made the point very elegantly. Maybe it was something I shouldn't have said. But it was said with a twinkle in the eye, it was just mischievous, it was never meant to be taken seriously. But of course, the Radio Times, how many people, okay, hands up, how many people actually read the Radio Times? How many people actually heard the Radio Times? I thought I was on pretty safe ground, to be fair. I thought this is what I could get away with, and it was a long day. Anyway, so what I didn't realise that even the Radio Times, when it comes back publication day, they ping out a nice quote like that across the world. Within seconds of publication, I had the Sydney Morning Herald on the line saying, "G'day mate, what's this about us having no culture in Australia?" And I went into full, quite rightly, went into full apology mode. Said, look, I'm really sorry. I've been to Australia 5 years of my life in total. I've been to theatre probably more often in Sydney and Melbourne than I have in Edinburgh, London. That was true. I said, I understand everything about your films, your theatres, you've got more divas coming out of Australia than you have in London. I love your culture. I have absolutely nothing against your culture. It was a stupid line for which I profusely apologise. And eventually they put the phone down, and that was that. A couple months later, the Ashes are nearly upon us in the UK, and I'm at a charity game in Cirencester in the west, in the southwest, as guests of the host there, and maybe doing a bit on umpire. And it's a game between an old England 11 and an old Australia 11. And representing that particular team from Australia is the great man himself, Shane Warne, who is back across to do another summer of commentary and all the rest of it. And also, I have to take my hat off, he still bowls absolutely brilliantly, even though he's officially retired for years. So he's playing in this game. And I haven't seen him for 6 months since the last summer, but I sense there is something on his mind, because the first sight of him, he is striding towards me in that urgent, finger-pointing way. And And I realised that maybe he'd sort of maybe seen something. And as he got closer, I heard him say loudly and very clearly, "Oi, mate, what's this about us having no fucking culture?" And as he got closer, I said, "I rest my case." There's a long way to go tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to finish on an Ashes story with the great Don Bradman. You've probably heard it before. The great Don Bradman, the man whose average in Test match cricket remains at 99.96, I think it is. 4 runs in his final innings against England at the Oval, and he would have averaged exactly 100. As it was a fellow called Eric Hollis bowled with googly, he missed it because they said he had tears in his eyes because of the guard of honour for his final ever Test match. And the poor bastard had to live with an average of 99.96. I don't know how he survived all those years after that with such a poor average. And mine was, was as high as 44, I think it was. So that gives you an absolute clue as to how special this man was. Now, the Don, as he was known, was watching a game that day some years later. He'd been through the mill as a player, as a selector. He was now a senior figure in Australian cricket, watching the game as Australia played England. The scoreline was probably the usual one down there, which was something like 2-1 for Australia. And England were fighting back hard, trying to keep away in the series. His mate was with him, mate sat alongside. And he said to the Don halfway through this day, this lovely 40-degree day in Adelaide, he said, "Mate, Don," he said, "how do you reckon," he said, "you'd get on against the current England side?" And the Don said, "Well, I don't know, I think I'd probably average about 55 or 60. And his mate looked at him slightly aghast. He said, "Hang on, just have a look at the sides playing against us right now. You've got people like, let's have a look at the England side. There's Devon Malcolm, fast, born to make fast, quick, erratic, never get you out. There's Angus Fraser, steady, medium pace, fast, medium pace, good pitch. You play him with respect, he's not going to get you out. There's Phil Tuffle, might turn on next Thursday." He went through the entire team. He's a good lad, so don't worry, you take it. Went through the entire team, entire bowling attack, and said, "Look, mate, you average 99.96. Why do you say you'd only average 55 or 60 now against this particular England team?" And the Don looked at his mate and said quietly, "You must remember, I am 86.